Today, we have with us Dr. LAL CA, Professor of English at the School of Distance Education, University of Kerala. He is also an English language teaching expert and heads the Kerala chapter of LAL CA, English Language Teachers Association of India. And interacting with him, we have two vibrant young minds, Srijita S., a final year electrical engineering student from College of Engineering, Trivandrum, and Nikhil Joji, a final year computer science engineering student from College of Engineering, Trivandrum.
We couldn't find you in the coffee house today, so that's why we came here.
Well, I wanted to have a coffee, but I had some extra work to do, so I thought I'll remain in the office. Anyway, happy you came.
That is okay, sir. We were actually discussing about a word that Dr. Tharoor popularized recently, floxenosine
Yes.
That word actually amused me. Sir, how do you think one can acquire such a remarkable vocabulary?
Wow, that's interesting. Recently, there was a speech that Dr. Tharoor gave where he said how he came to acquire such a rich vocabulary. He said how, as a child, he was a bit sickly, was often laid up, and had the habit of reading a lot of books, and that is how he acquired vocabulary. And he also recommends that the best way to acquire vocabulary is reading, which is very much true. So, to reply to your question in one sentence, the best way to acquire a good, rich vocabulary is to read a lot. But in our context, where we have the pressure of finishing our syllabus and so many other things to do, we may not always be able to do that. But it's very, very important to read a lot. But even as you read, as you come across new vocabulary items, every time you don't run for a dictionary, because that will impede your spontaneity. So you read and you come across new words, and from the context you understand words. That is true. But the problem is many of these words may not really register. Some may be forgotten. Because you want to consciously improve your vocabulary, after you become familiar with the word, focus a bit on it. Maybe note it down. Go to the dictionary and look up the different shades of meaning that particular word has.
We've also seen people actually writing down maybe around 5 words a day and then manually making an effort to learn it. So what would you have to say about that?
I remember a friend of mine had this habit. He had a card in his pocket every day with 7, 8 words. And every now and then he'll take the card out and look at it. Not a bad idea, though I personally wouldn't want to do that. That's not my nature. But my friend did acquire quite a good vocabulary through that. So what works for me need not work for another person. So it's not right to say which is the best method. Still, I would say the most natural way of acquiring vocabulary is certainly reading. But this is also a good way of doing it. You consciously pick up a few words and you look at them once in a while and form that word in your mind so that the spelling becomes clear. And maybe check up the word in the dictionary. But whatever you do, remember to contextualize the word, because words have meaning only in the context. No word in any language has a meaning of its own. The meaning is given to it by the speakers. So these words cannot be taken out of the context. So even if you learn the word separately, you need to go back and locate the words in context, use them in context, and become comfortable with them. So that's very important.
Sir, can you elaborate with some examples?
Well, as I said, words have significance only in the context. And I would say that words have different shades of meaning too. So very often we would want to know the meaning of a word. It's very difficult to say that. For example, somebody reads in a paper that he looked very handsome in his tattered clothes. There, the word handsome is used mischievously, sarcastically. It means not handsome. So he asks you, what's the meaning of handsome? And you say good looking. He will get the wrong meaning of the word. So you need to ask him what is the context where you saw the word. So it's very important to see how the word is used in the context. And you talk about synonyms. You say, what are the synonyms of happiness? You would say bliss, glee, pleasure, rapture, many other words you might say. But this doesn't mean that one of these words can be replaced with another word. So the word glee, for example, cannot be used in a position where you would use bliss. So these have slight differences. No big change will come, but subtle difference is there in different words. Even synonyms are not really synonyms. We use them in different contexts. Another set of examples would be the word sorrow, melancholy, doldrums, sadness, unhappiness. All these words are related to sadness, but we don't always use them interchangeably. Some work in some contexts better than the other words. Yeah, I have a couple of files to sign. Give me a second.
I did not see you yesterday in class. Where were you?
I actually had to attend a ceremony yesterday. It was my nephew's, education initiation, or I don't know.
You mean his first time writing that ceremony, right?
I went to Eduthinirthal.
Yeah, my files are done. You are talking about Eduthiniruthu. And what did you say the word was for that?
Initiate to writing, maybe?
Well, that's interesting. That's a good way of saying it. Well, recently I heard a discussion with a bunch of colleagues where they were trying to find the English word for Sanjayana. This is another interesting thing about vocabulary. As we said in some other context, language is very closely related to culture. And each language will have words that are related to that culture which won't have an equivalent in another language. For example, the word Eduthiniruthu, it belongs to our culture. It is not there in English. So the English people won't have a directly equivalent word for that. So you will need to find some other way of explaining it. But the point to remember here is we need to keep in mind that all Malayalam words will not have an equivalent English word, and all English words won't have an equivalent Malayalam either. So you need not go looking for the exact translation of many words. I'll tell you another amusing example. In English, the word love is a single word we use for a multitude of expression of affection between children, a child to mother. Everything is love. But in Malayalam, you have an array of words for love. Sneham, pranayam, ishtam. So many words are there. But in English, you have a love. So two different languages, two different logic. So you need not go hunting for exact meanings of words. Another point I'd like to add here is, even though you enrich your vocabulary, as you asked, the items that Dr. Tharoor introduces amusingly once in a while, it's good to have a rich vocabulary, not very long words all the time. But when we actually speak to people in informal context, it's always nicer to use simpler words. So let's get this clear. When you talk to a friend, when you talk in informal context, if you use very high-sounding words, you will sound pedantic. Pedantic is you have a tendency to show off your knowledge. So there you use simple words. For example, the road was dilapidated. It's a good way of saying, but you come to this college and say, I could not reach in time because the road was dilapidated. It will look odd. You will say the road was badly damaged, something like that. But then what is the use of this vocabulary that you acquire? The rich fund of words you have will help you write better when you are attempting to write something related to your job, or when you attempt creative writing, you will be able to come up with much beautiful expressions. But in your everyday talk, we use ordinary words, and you reserve your higher vocabulary for such purposes.
So you were saying the most natural way of learning vocabulary is through reading.
But it is also okay to refer a dictionary and consciously acquire it.
Well, a blend of both would be a good idea. But we need to remember that even when you pick up a new word while reading, or you consciously study a new word, keep in mind you should study the spelling, you should study the meaning, or rather the shades of meaning. Each word will have more than one shade of meaning very often. So read them and also study the pronunciation. In English, there is no one-to-one correspondence between the spelling and the pronunciation. So pronunciation has to be learned separately. So when you learn a new word, make the pronunciation also your own. It's very important. Well, I think we don't have much time left now. I need to go for a meeting. But let me conclude by adding that, you have a rich vocabulary oftentimes. Maybe you have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words in your memory, which you are not conscious about. They will remain there in an unconscious state of little use to you. This you picked up through reading, through exposure. But this forms your passive vocabulary. This passive vocabulary needs to be activated. So, as we said the last time we met, reading a lot, listening and reading and writing helps to activate this vocabulary. So it's equally important to learn new words, also to activate, put to use and make these words your own. So ultimately it boils down to practice again. So the best thing you need to remember is to read a lot to make your grammar better, to make your vocabulary better.
So do words like be, in, for, so such small words, do they count as vocabulary?
That's interesting. Yes, I would say. English vocabulary can be broadly divided into two categories. Words like those you said, the, and, in, through, between, all these words. We call them like auxiliary verbs, prepositions, conjunctions, articles, etc. They are fixed in number. They are there for purely grammatical purposes. They don't have a particular meaning of their own. They do not grow. People don't add a new preposition. But English language, the English vocabulary is very dynamic. It grows every day. You may not know, but several new words are added into English language every day, particularly with the fast advances in science and technology. But these words never grow. So when we actually mean about developing or enhancing our vocabulary, we think in terms of new nouns, new adjectives, new adverbs, verbs, etc. Of course, you must be very sure of where to use your the and your between. But, the increase in your vocabulary comes in what we call the content words or the rich array of words with full meaning. Well, the story of how there came to be words like auxiliary verbs is another story.
What is that story? Can you tell us?
It's not a story. I meant an episode in the history of English history as the language evolved. Initially, when English was young, we call that period Old English. English was also like Malayalam in the way we formed new meaning by adding on to a word like poguga, pogum, pogumayirikkum, etc. In English, we used to have it like that. For example, in English, the word choose had many forms. Chaos and chayas, kuron, koran were 5 different forms of the word choose. Today we have choose and chose, and perhaps chooses. So that times have gone. Today, with these endings gone, what we do is we bring in new words to connect two words. In Malayalam, we still have endings, so we don't need auxiliary verbs. In English, we need auxiliary verbs. We need prepositions to show the connections between words. We need conjunctions again. All these became necessary when English lost these word endings. There still are endings, but not as much as there used to be. Well, it was fun talking to you, but it is 5:30, and if you remain here for long, they will lock the office up.
So before you leave, can you tell us the meaning of the word that we mentioned earlier, floxinocinihilipilification?
Well, the meaning of the word, if I remember right, is the act of estimating something as worthless.
Well, that's interesting. But I would any day